Hey guys, welcome to lesson 6. Very exciting business. This week we're going to be talking about the chromatic scale, chromatic solfege, and then using chromatic solfege to write solfege when there's an accidental that appears outside of the key signature. So let's jump right in. The chromatic scale is what you would get if you played every single note on the piano keyboard for one octave. Whenever you write a chromatic scale, you're pretty much always going to start on C natural. We're going to start by writing an ascending chromatic scale, which means it's going from a lower note to a higher note. What I like to do as a first step is to write in all of the white key notes first, because they don't require an accidental, so you can just put them right in. Just make sure that you're leaving space where a black key exists in between two of the notes. So we already have our C natural. We're not going to go straight to D. We're going to leave a space, put D here. We're going to leave another space. E goes here. And then notice that between E and F, there's not a black key. So we don't need to leave a space this time. We just go straight on to F, and we leave a space. G, leave a space. A, leave a space. B, and again between B and C there's not a black key, so we just go straight to our last note in the ascending chromatic scale, C. Now all that's left to do is add in the black keys. So here's our first black key. You'll remember that there are two ways we can name this note. It could either be C sharp or it could be D flat. So the rule of thumb is that when you're writing an ascending chromatic scale, you're always going to use sharps. And when you're writing a descending scale, you're always going to use flats. So this key is not going to be D flat since we're writing an ascending scale going from low to high. Instead, it's going to be C sharp. Then this one could either be E flat or D sharp, but since we're writing an ascending scale, it's going to be D sharp. And the same is going to be true for the rest of the black keys in this scale. So this one's going to be F sharp, G sharp, and A sharp. Ta-da! The descending scale is going to go from high to low. So we're going to start on our high C natural, and then it's going to be a really similar process to writing the ascending chromatic scale, except for when we get to the part where we name the black keys, we're going to use flats instead of sharps. So we'll start by writing in all of the white key notes, leaving space for any black keys that might happen in between. So there's no black key between C and B. But then we're going to leave a space before A, a space before G, a space before F, no space between E and F because there's no black key between E and F on the keyboard, and then a space before D, and a space before C. Then we're going to go and we're going to name all of the black keys. So this time this one's our first black key, and this time we're not going to call it A sharp, we're going to call it B flat. Similarly, this is not G sharp because we're writing a descending chromatic scale. It's going to be A flat. And the same is going to apply to G flat, E flat, and D flat. I know what you're thinking. Maddie, I'm sure writing chromatic scales is fun and cool, but all I want to do is sing them. Well, don't you worry. We're going to talk about how to do that right now. The solfege syllables that we know and love only go so far because they refer to a major scale. So whatever note you call do, those syllables only refer to the notes that exist in that major scale. So, for instance, if we called C do and we wanted to write in the solfege for this chromatic scale, we would only be able to write in solfege for the notes that exist in C major. Remember that there are no sharps or flats in C major, so that means that right now we can only put solfege to the notes that don't have an accidental. Let's go ahead and do that. So if C is do, then D natural is going to be re, E natural is going to be me. F natural is going to be fa. G natural is so. A natural is la. And B natural is T. To name the rest of the notes in this scale, we're going to need to use chromatic solfege. Chromatic solfege does what accidentals do for notes. So there's a special syllable for when the note that would normally be do is raised by a half step, like it is here. Instead of C natural, which is do, we have C sharp. And the syllable for do raised by one half step is D. When the note that would be re is raised by a half step, like it is here, we have D sharp instead of D natural. The syllable for that is re. When fa gets raised by a half step, that is called fi. When so gets raised by a half step, the raised note is called si. And finally, when la is raised by a half step, the solfege syllable is li. Notice that all of the raised solfege syllables end with the letter I or the sound E. So we're just changing the vowel sound on the regular solfege syllables. So do, when it's raised a half step, becomes D, re becomes re, fa becomes fi, sol becomes si, and la becomes li. So that's a good way to remember it. And now let's practice singing our ascending chromatic scale. Here's do, do, di, re, re, mi, fa, fi, sol, si, la, li, ti, do. We also have special syllables that tell us when a solfege syllable has been lowered by a half step. But first let's start by writing in the solfege syllables we know. So if C is do, we can write in the solfege for C, B, A, G, F, E, D, and C. So now our first note with an accidental is B flat. If it was B natural, it would be T, but it's T lowered by one half step. And that solfege syllable for that is te. When la gets lowered by one half step, here we have A flat instead of A natural, it becomes le. When so is lowered by one half step, it becomes se. When mi is lowered by a half step, it becomes me. And when re is lowered by a half step, it becomes ra. Again, there is a pattern for the lowered solfege syllables, but it does have one exception. So except for re, which already ends with an E, the new solfege syllables end with the letter E, which makes the sound A. So T became te, la became le, sol became se, mi became me, and re, which is the exception, becomes ra. And now let's sing our descending chromatic scale. Here's high do, do, ti, te, la, le, sol, si, fa, mi, re, ra, do. Let's practice singing the chromatic scale one more time. Here's do, do, di, re, re, mi, fa, fi, sol, si, la, li, ti, do. Do, ti, te, la, le, sol, si, fa, mi, re, ra, do. So singing a chromatic scale is like a cool party trick that you can bust out to make new friends. But the really cool thing about chromatic solfege is that it can help you to learn more tricky pieces of music. And particularly when we start working on more minor mode things, you're going to start seeing a lot more accidentals that don't appear in the key signature. And until now, it was like, I don't know, do sharp, but now you can put in a real solfege syllable. Exciting, isn't it? I know. Part D on handout 6 gives us a chance to practice using chromatic solfege in the context of a sight singing exercise or piece of music. Take a look at number 2, which is in F major, meaning that F is do. And you should be able to do the first 5 notes just perfectly fine, the way that you know how to do. But then we get to this note, B natural, and this is our first accidental. So when you come to an accidental in a piece of music, the first thing you want to do is check the key signature, because sometimes editors get crazy, they like to repeat themselves, they give you what's called a courtesy accidental, and they just repeat what's already in the key signature. So we want to check and make sure. But nope, this key signature has a B flat, and this pitch is B natural. So that means we're going to have to use chromatic solfege. So now that we've determined we need to use chromatic solfege, the first step is going to be to decide if this accidental didn't exist, what would that note, what solfege syllable would that note be? And it would be fa. So since we know that our chromatic solfege only changes the vowel, I'm going to write in the first letter, just so that that's one less piece of information to keep track of. Then the next step is to decide, is this new pitch, the one with the accidental, higher or lower than the version that exists in the key? So in the key signature we have B flat, and this pitch is B natural. So what we need to decide is which one's higher. And if you need to check a piano keyboard, you can, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you that B natural is higher. So that means that this pitch is 1/2 step higher than fa. And we know that that is fi. And then you can continue, do the next 3 just like normal. And we've come to our next accidental. So this one is E flat. So we're going to check the key signature. Nope, the key signature has E natural in this major key. So that means we're again going to need to use chromatic solfege. If the flat sign wasn't there, an E would be T in F major. So I'm going to go ahead and write the first letter, and then I'm going to decide, okay, is this new pitch higher or lower than it would be if it was agreeing with the key signature? So in the key signature, E should be E natural, but in this case, it's E flat. So that means we have to decide which one's higher, E flat or E natural. And E flat is going to be lower than E natural, so that means that this pitch is T lowered by 1/2 step, which we know is te. Hopefully, given those 2 examples, you are feeling pretty good about this, ready to tackle the rest of this exercise and the other exercises. If you're feeling at all rusty on your rules about accidentals or the piano keyboard, I would go ahead and take one out or draw one in the margins while you're completing this, just so that you can remember how the natural signs relate differently to sharps and flats. Sometimes a natural note is higher than it would be in the key signature, and sometimes it's lower. Just depends. Also, you're going to need to remember how long an accidental takes effect. Hint, hint. So that's all for now, crew. Happy solfeging, and as always, let me know if you have any questions, either in the comments or by email. Happy to answer them, and I'll see you next time.